All right, well, good morning. My name is Rick Frank. I'm the Executive Director of the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy, and I'm delighted to welcome each and every one of you to this conference on California and the future of environmental law and policy. The conference is sponsored by the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy, and I just want to spend a moment talking about that. Our center is part and parcel of the UC Berkeley School of Law here on the UC Berkeley campus. The center, which is about 2 years old now, has really several discrete functions. We are the heart, we hope and believe, of the environmental law program at UC Berkeley, and we're proud to say, and we firmly believe, that it's one of the top environmental law programs at any law school in the country. We have a very strong and large group of students committed to environmental and energy issues. We have one of the most robust environmental law curriculums in the entire nation. Two brief examples. Last fall, we put together and offered one of the first courses on climate change law and policy of any major law school in the country. This fall, one of my colleagues at the center that I'll be introducing in a moment will be offering a seminar on alternative energy and related technologies. We also do convenings like this, major conferences, symposia, and other events to bring our students and our faculty into contact with other academics, other scholars, practitioners, and policymakers. And today's conference, about which I'll speak more in a moment, is a perfect example of that. A second key function of our center is to attempt to collaborate with and stitch together some of the marvelous and deep scholarship that goes on elsewhere here at the UC Berkeley campus and throughout the University of California system. And again, at this conference over the next 2 days, you'll be exposed to some of the folks that work in those other centers, and you'll get a sense of that collaboration. But the sum is truly greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when it comes to those kind of interdisciplinary collaborations that our center fosters and is eager to participate in. Third and finally, this is a center that really believes in applied research and applied scholarship, and we firmly believe that the work and the research we do here is really most appropriately applied in the public policy sector. So all of us work hard to interact with policymakers at the regional, state, national, and international levels through publication of white papers, through expert testimony in Congress and in the California legislature, through a variety of efforts to translate the scholarship and the findings of the work we do here at UC Berkeley and at the center to make it useful in the world of public policy. And you'll see some of that manifested here today as well. So the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy is many things to many people. I'm proud to be a part of it. And let me just at this moment take the opportunity to introduce my colleagues at the center here, and Simi Payne, our Associate Director, who is focused on international environmental law and policy issues. Steve Weissman, who is relatively new to his position at Bolt, our new Associate Director, who will head our energy project and really focus on energy law and policy issues. In the back of the room, Arika Sampson, our very able center administrator, Svetlana Dubenko, our event planner, and Andrea Saw, our work study student. All three of these folks have been working hard all week to get this conference ready for you. If you have any questions or any concerns over the next 2 days, please seek any or all of us out. We're here to make sure that your conference experience here is as rewarding and fulfilling as possible, and we'd love to hear from you. Any concerns you have, please let us know. Some brief logistics. The bathrooms, if you go out this door and straight down the hall, the bathrooms are just through the lobby. Ladies' room on the right, men's room on the left. We are taping this conference, and we'll be posting the results on our website. We will have a question and answer period for virtually all the panels and speakers. You'll see both aisles microphones, and since we want to make sure we capture the questions as well as the commentary, we would ask if you do have questions during the Q&A period that you please come up to the microphone so your questions can be recorded. If you have taken an eagle-eye look at the agenda, you may see one curiosity. Our luncheon plenary speaker is scheduled to conclude at 1:15, at which point we will then go immediately into the afternoon breakout panel sessions. So that session, the luncheon plenary speech, will finish at 1:15, and on a related point, the panels will begin promptly at 1:15. So there's no overlap there. Another word about the conference. We have purposefully, in putting this conference together, we have put together a faculty composed of academics, respected academics, not just from UC Berkeley, but throughout the country, public policymakers, and practicing attorneys, reflecting the diversity of views. The audience is similarly diverse. It's not law students and academics. There's some of you here, but we also have members of the general public. We have folks from government agencies and policymakers and others, and we're all delighted to have you. Let me mention briefly the sponsors of this conference, without whom we would not be in a position to go forward. Our gold sponsors include the State Bar of California's Environmental Law section and the law firm of Farella, Braun, and Martel. Silver sponsors include a number of other respected law firms in California: Cox, Castle, and Nicholson, Bingham McCutcheon, Remy Thomas, Moose, and Manley, the Resources Law Group, Shute, Mahaly, and Weinberger, and Beveridge and Diamond. We're delighted to have their support and participation in this conference. Apropos of what I said earlier in terms of our collaboration with partners here on campus, we're delighted also to have a number of sponsors from other parts of the UC Berkeley community, including the Berkeley Institute for the Environment, whose talented director is with us this morning, the Berkeley Water Center, the Center for Energy and Environmental Innovation, the Center for Environmental Public Policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy, the Energy and Resources Group. You'll be hearing from their co-director later today, the UC Energy Institute, and the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And we're proud to have those partners not only for this conference, but in connection with our center's ongoing work. Program materials. We're trying to make this a very green conference, and some of you have come long distances, so we're not burdening you with a large group of hard copy handouts. Rest assured, however, that for the PowerPoint presentations and other papers that are going to be delivered at the conference over the next 2 days, we will post those in the form of links to our conference website, so you will have access to those immediately after the conference in hopefully a user-friendly and environmentally sensitive manner. I also want to use this opportunity to talk about or to mention an exciting collaboration that we're doing with our Ecology Law Quarterly, which is the foremost environmental law journal in the entire nation, which is just celebrating, I believe, Jen, its 30th anniversary. ELQ, as it's known here locally, is launching this week Ecology Law Currents, an online companion journal to the Ecology Law Quarterly. And Ecology Law Currents is a forum for short-form environmental writing, and in collaboration with our California Center for Environmental Law and Policy, the ELQ and Environmental Law, Ecology Law Currents will focus their next electronic issue on the work and conclusions reached at this conference. So you'll see some of that, what you'll hear today, translated into online publication as well. Well, let me set some broad themes here as we begin this conference. 2 years ago, the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy held its first formal event, and it was a conference that had precisely this title, California and the Future of Environmental Law and Policy. It really focused on what California was doing in a wide array of environmental law and policy areas and initiatives. And we thought it was most appropriate 2 years later to revisit those issues, because how much has happened and how far we have come in a brief 24 months. We really want to focus on California's leadership role in setting environmental law and environmental policy, and for that you can look back not just a couple of years ago or a couple of decades ago, but well into California's history. Nearly 200 years ago, California was the scene of one of the first environmental disputes over the legal and policy battle over hydraulic mining in California's Sacramento Valley. And that took litigation and important cases decided by the federal courts and the California Supreme Court in the 1880s that were hugely important in really changing the focus of California's economy from an extractive economy based on mining, which of course it was in the first 20 years or so of California's history, to an agrarian economy, and really launching the agricultural industry in California, which remains to this day the most vibrant and single most important part of California's economic sector. And that happened as a result of that landmark environmental dispute. At the beginning of what we think of as the modern era of environmental law, which began about 1970. You also saw, through a variety of ways, California exercising a leadership role, most prominently in 1972 through the voters of the state of California, creating the California Coastal Act, really creating, through voter initiative, a new paradigm for coastal planning and coastal regulation that served then, as it does now, as a model for the nation and internationally. On the energy front, in the mid-1970s, the Warren-Alquist Act, passed by the California legislature in 1974, creating really a visionary new approach to energy planning and regulation in the state of California, which really launched unprecedented initiatives in terms of government energy forecasting, innovative and very effective energy conservation measures, and a number of other energy-related reforms that have been replicated in other states around the country by the Congress and the federal level, and internationally by a number of other nations. In the 1980s, again, the voters spoke in adopting Proposition 65, creating a very innovative, non-traditional way to approach protection of safe drinking water and control and labeling of hazardous substances. And now, of course, in the new millennium, California has been taking on very much a leadership role with respect to the various scientific, policy, and legal issues related to global warming and climate change, much about which you'll hear over the next 2 days. California has been at the part of the story has been a story of its evolving relationship with other states, with the United States government, and with other nations. With respect to other states, a good example over the last 40 years, we may hear a little bit about this from our plenary speaker, I'm not sure, the Colorado River states, of which California is one, have spent 40 years in debate over how to allocate the precious water resources from that finite water basin, which really has tested and challenged California's relationships with its fellow Colorado Basin states. More recently, beginning in 1968, California, through Interstate compact with the state of Nevada, created an approach to protection of one of California and Nevada's most precious environmental resources, the Lake Tahoe Basin, confronted by substantial challenges and environmental hazards, and really provides a model for bi-state cooperation to protect and restore a precious and sensitive environmental resource. As many of you who work in the area of environmental policy know, with respect to California's relationship with the federal government, much of environmental law is based on a model of cooperative federalism, of shared responsibility between states and the federal government. Perhaps the two most prominent examples are the Federal Clean Air Act and the Federal Clean Water Act. More recently, that cooperative federalism model has been tested as California in particular acts to push the federal government to act to take environmental steps that it believes are required either by federal law, by sound public policy, or both in the face of perceived federal inaction. And even more controversial, California's effort to fill what it perceives to be the policy vacuum in certain areas of environmental law by acting at the state level. That has generated a great deal of controversy and no small amount of litigation between the federal government, the state of California, and the regulated community, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about that in our first panel later this morning. And finally, with respect to our international partners in the Western Hemisphere and around the globe, let me return briefly to the Colorado River. There was a very important and interesting decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last year dealing with the Colorado River and the efforts of the Mexican government and the people of Baja California to take advantage of what they believe to be their right to the waters of the Colorado River Basin. International fisheries issues are looming large. I think we'll touch on that in a panel this afternoon. Overfishing of our oceans and some of the challenges in terms of international diplomacy and natural resource management that are at issue there. And of course, climate change. I'm taken by our Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's repeated reference to the nation state of California. And he has been very aggressive in adopting a foreign policy of sorts directly with our international partners throughout the globe, who have, many of whom have again looked to California for leadership in many areas of energy policy and climate change and other areas. So we will be touching on all of those, or many of those issues at this conference over the next 2 days, and we're delighted you're here and are looking forward to a vigorous discussion of those areas. Simi, I think I saw our esteemed dean stick his head in. Could you see if he's with us or has bolted to other duties? While we're waiting, I can mention two other logistical details. Virtually everything we're going to do today, with two exceptions, will be carried out in this room, booth auditorium. The lunch, we're forecast to have a lovely afternoon, so we will have box lunches available outside and tables set up at the courtyard immediately to my left, your right when you go outside this door. This afternoon, as I mentioned, we will have breakout panels, and the one of those breakout panels will be held in this in booth auditorium. The other in room 140, which is just across the way. All right. The Dean we'll catch up with the Dean momentarily, but I don't want to delay the start of our formal presentation by our first keynote speaker. I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Peter Gleick, who is the co-founder and president of the Pacific Institute in Oakland, California. The Institute is one of the world's leading policy research groups addressing global environmental and development problems, particularly in the area of freshwater resources. And in that regard, Dr. Gleick is an internationally recognized water expert. I've been an admirer of Peter's for many years. He's done some of the deepest thinking and most thoughtful writing about the subject of water. Just to editorialize one more moment, we are confronting, I think, in a very real way in terms of front pages of of every major newspaper in the country, a lot of energy-related stories in terms of soaring energy prices and Mideast politics and what have you. It is my view, at least, that the looming water shortages in California and the American West and globally are going to put even greater challenges to our political system, to international diplomacy, and our resource management efforts. So this is a very timely topic and a very timely address, and I'm delighted to present to you Dr. Peter Gleick.
Good morning. If I close this, is this going to cause complete chaos for speakers after me? I hope not. I don't know if the Dean is here, but to the Dean and to the audience and I guess to members of the jury, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you this morning to discuss the future of California's water. And thanks especially to Rick, who invited me and whose work I've admired for a long time. I give a lot of talks on water and climate change issues and sustainable management of resources and that sort of thing. But I really appreciated the opportunity to come and talk about the future of California's water because it gave me a chance to step back a little bit and think about something I've worked on and the Institute's worked on for a long time in a little bit different sense. I'd like to rename my talk, but I noticed in the agenda that Rick didn't put the name of my talk there, and that's enormously liberating for me. And so I'm going to talk about Hollywood movies and Sandra Bullock and avocados and the Clean Water Act and Dante's Inferno and cholera and the Mars rover and greenhouse gas emissions, which of course you all know are related to each other. The title that I sent to Rick was, "Can California's water problems be solved?" And I started thinking about that, and I started writing my talk, and I just thought, that's a ridiculous title. Of course California's water problems can be solved. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, of course California's water problems can't possibly be solved. And so maybe it's not such a ridiculous title, but maybe it should have been, will California's water problems be solved? Or how California's water problems can be solved? Or does California have a water problem? Or a sustainable vision for solving California's water problems? I mean, you see my dilemma. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a talk that touches on all of those permutations. The original title, "Can California's water problems be solved?" This was one of my difficulties. Seemed to assume that California has a water problem. And maybe that's fair. Maybe that is a given. But then I started thinking, all right, if that's true, what is California's water problem? And that's when I started to run into a little bit of a difficulty, which I'll come back to in a second. It also assumes that we all understand what California's water problem is and that the challenge is really just figuring out how to solve it. And I think that's wrong. So let me take a step back first. We talk a lot about a California water crisis, or a climate crisis, or an ocean crisis, or an energy crisis, and yet others criticize the environmental community or scientists for overusing the word crisis. Everything's a crisis. And there are a lot of different ways of looking at the water problem, and I work at both the global level and the local level on water issues. And I'm often asked, what's the worst water crisis facing us? Well, that's actually easy for me. I think the worst water crisis facing us is the failure to meet basic human needs for water supply and sanitation worldwide. There are 1 billion people worldwide without access to safe drinking water. There are 2.5 billion people worldwide without access to adequate sanitation services. And that failure to meet basic human needs for water leads to cholera and dysentery and guinea worm, a whole series of water-related diseases. And I think that's a crisis. But that's a very different kind of a crisis than we have in California, where we don't have cholera or dysentery or guinea worm, where mostly we've met basic human needs for water supply and sanitation. It's a different kind of a problem. And so I think we have to be a little careful about the way we use the word crisis and the way we perceive the challenges that face us. And so I think different groups and different organizations and different individuals and different communities and different interests dealing with California water problems have different perspectives on what the water problems in the state are. And so we all know California is a big state. California is a really big state. I think Rick's comments about the governor's comments that we're a nation state are absolutely correct. This is a huge state. There are many different people. There are many different kinds of people. There are many different communities. There are many different interests. And they all have different perspectives on water. And so let me offer some of those perspectives. Now, I have my own perspective, of course, and I'm going to try and share some other people's perspectives from my perspective, I guess, if you will. But to the degree that these are caricatures, let me try and do that. So the agricultural perspective. I think the agricultural community feels that their use of water in California, which is very substantial, is the most important. It produces food, and not just food for us, but food for the rest of the globe. And that's very important. And I think they worry about changes in the status quo. They worry about overturning the water rights structure that favors them, but that developed over the last 150 years. They worry about losing agricultural land to development. They worry about losing agricultural water to the cities. And they worry about the loss of the sense of community, a way of life, truly a way of life. And if you talk to the agricultural community, that's a big part of what they think California is all about. And it's fundamentally tied to water. What's the environmental perspective? Well, to some degree, it's the perception that humans use too much of the water that California has. Too much of the water withdrawn has come at the expense of the environment. There are threats to environmental values from human use or contamination of water. We have disappearing wetlands and disappearing aquatic ecosystems. We have enormous threats to fisheries, to endangered species from human use of water. And the environmental community also feels that part of the water crisis is losing a big part of what is California, and that's the environmental values in California. Urban water users have a different perspective. Urban communities feel we produce more dollars per gallon than the agricultural sector. And so there's a higher economic value of water used in industrial, commercial, residential water uses. A rational water policy would meet urban needs with a higher priority from an economic point of view. Urban users worry about the reliability of water to urban centers. They worry about population growth, which is growing mostly in the urban areas. The cost of water, they worry about water quality. The environmental justice community's perspective is that their voice hasn't been heard over the years in any decisions about water management and water policy. And they have a concern about the social and the cultural and the equity implications of California water decisions. They worry about inequitable health impacts of water use in California through direct water quality problems and indirect things like exposure to contaminants through fish in the Bay Area, for example, or fish taken from the Bay. And I would note that this community has raised the awareness of the fact that even in California, We've failed to meet basic human needs for safe water and affordable sanitation for everyone in California. It turns out there are a lot of people in California that don't have access to safe drinking water, something we've sort of taken for granted here. Scientists have a different perspective. Scientists often believe the problem is not enough information. If only we knew more about fish biology or climatic variability or the health implications of pharmaceuticals in drinking water or in groundwater, then the rationality of knowledge and science would lead to the right decisions. I think economists believe if only we let pricing and markets play a proper role, then the rationality of economics would lead to the right decision. I think lawyers think if only we let the rationality of water laws and water institutions and water rights systems properly be applied and enforced, that the rationality of law would lead to the right decisions. And then there are other perspectives. Northern California and Southern California are in different places on water. Avocado growers and alfalfa growers are in different places in their perspective about California water policy. Rice growers versus almond growers. There are a lot of different perspectives in California. And I raise this question of perspective because I think it helps to explain the lack of progress in the rationality of California's water laws and management and institutions over the years. Given all of those differences, maybe it's not really a surprise that it's hard sometimes to find common ground in California. So in the end, I think the critical thing is to reach solutions to California's water problems, but only if the solutions don't cause a problem for somebody else. And in a state as big and as diverse as California, it's pretty hard to do that. And that's a big challenge for us. All right, so maybe rather than spend my time trying to figure out which perspective is right or which definition of California's water problem is right, maybe we can say some things about what California's water crisis isn't. So let me offer some thoughts about that. I think that California's water crisis is not the result of a lack of water, or a lack of money, or a lack of brains, or a lack of infrastructure. Absolute scarcity is not our problem. Yes, there are regional problems with water scarcity. Sometimes we have droughts and floods, there's variability. But I'm going to offer the argument that California is not water poor, but water rich. And I'm going to come back to that. Poverty is also not our problem. We're a very rich state. We're rich in money, we're rich in education, we're rich in ingenuity, we're sometimes rich in goodwill. I think the problem, like water, is that sometimes those things are not very well distributed. There's an uneven distribution of money and ingenuity and goodwill and water, of course. And so that uneven distribution is part of the challenge. Let's figure out how to deal with that. Lack of intelligence isn't our problem. We've decoded the human genome, we manipulate substances at the subatomic level, we've eliminated some diseases permanently. Water's easy compared to some of those things. We've built smart machines like the Mars rover that's roving around on Mars looking for water. Lack of infrastructure, I'm going to argue, isn't a problem in California. We have a lot of water infrastructure. We have probably more water infrastructure in California per gallon or per capita or per square foot than almost anywhere on the planet. And I think the recent proposals to build some more dams in California results not from a real thoughtful analysis of the need for infrastructure, but from a knee-jerk response that that's what we've always done. We've always solved our water problems with infrastructure, and so we know how to do that. Let's build more infrastructure. But I would suggest that even the constituents who are proposing new infrastructure haven't really thought rationally about whether or not if we build a couple more dams in California or a peripheral canal in California, which may or may not be a good idea if we really think about it, whether or not at the end of the day the water problems that we have will be gone. And I'd like to argue that, in fact, if we did that, if we built some more infrastructure, we're going to be in the same place we are today. All of the problems that we have are still going to be here. So that suggests that maybe infrastructure is not the answer. Maybe it's a part of the answer, if we think about it rationally, but it's not going to solve our problems. I do think there's an infrastructure problem. I think part of the problem is the way we manage and operate that infrastructure, the way we design it, the way we make decisions to build it. But it's not one of quantity of infrastructure. I also think there are other pieces of the infrastructure question that we have to address. We have to invest in water quality infrastructure to make sure that the drinking water stays safe. I think we need to maintain investments and perhaps increase investments in our distribution pipelines to make sure that the safe water we put in at the top of the pipeline remains safe at the bottom of the pipeline. Purification and wastewater infrastructure is very important. There are infrastructure questions that we have to address, but they may be different than the ones that get the most attention. So let me go back for a minute to this question, this statement I made that California is water rich, not water poor. California actually has a lot of renewable water. Even with our big population, we have on the order of 2,500 cubic meters per person per year of renewable available water resources, 2,500 cubic meters per person per year. Now, that number doesn't mean much to most of you, I'm sure. First of all, I'm using metric units and not acre feet or gallons, and that's a problem by itself. But let me try and put it in perspective. Now, first of all, that 2,500 cubic meters per person per year doesn't even include the water we get from the Colorado, which is quite substantial in Southern California. Hydrologists who work on global water issues try to categorize countries or regions based on water scarcity, based on how much water they have available to them in a renewable way. And the standard is often 500 cubic meters per person per year or less. Those regions are considered truly water short, water scarce, if you have less than 500. If you have less than 1,000, that you're water stressed. If you have less than 1,700 cubic meters per person per year, you may have trouble growing all the food that you need with irrigated agriculture, and so on. So California has 2,500. Kuwait has 10, to offer a little perspective. The United Arab Emirates has 100. Saudi Arabia has 140 cubic meters per person per year. Singapore, 220. Israel, around 400, 450. Morocco, 1,100. Belgium has 1,200. California has 2,500. So from a pure perspective of how much water we get from nature, divided by the number of people we have, we're a water-rich state. Now, I acknowledge the distribution questions, the timing questions, those are challenges. But we don't peg the meter on the global perspective from a scarcity point of view. All right, so if California's water problem is not an absolute scarcity problem or a lack of money or brains or infrastructure, then what is it? Well, I think it's two things. I think it's a lack of vision about where we want to be, and I think it's lack of a sense of a clear path from where we are to where we want to be. How to get from where we are, which I think we realize isn't where we want to be, to a more positive vision for the future through that morass of infrastructure and old institutions and old philosophies of thinking and old water rights allocations that were embedded in, if you will. And so for the remainder of my talk, let me offer an alternative future, a positive vision for the next few decades, with the following caveat. I'm not sure how many of you have read Dante's Inferno recently, but Dante's Inferno, it's a political allegory, if you will, for the time, and the time was 700 years ago, approximately. And Dante wrote this vision of hell in which there are 9 circles of hell and the devil's all the way down at the bottom. And the deeper down you get, and he's journeying with Virgil through the different levels. And the deeper down you get, the worse are the sins of the people suffering. And every sinner is assigned to a different level and is assigned a special punishment for their sins. Well, way down in Circle 8, in ditch 4 of Circle 8, which is pretty far down, are the fortune tellers and the soothsayers and the, presumably, if he wrote it today, the climate modelers, who are condemned to go through life with their heads on, their particular punishment is they're marching through eternity with their heads on backwards. So they can't see where they're going. They can only see where they've been. And so I offer that caveat that I'm going to do a little bit of peering into the future with apologies to Dante. What do we want? Now, here comes the Hollywood movie part. I don't know how many of you saw the movie Miscongeniality with Sandra Bullock. I love that movie. It's a very silly movie. It's about a beauty pageant, and there's the FBI is investigating a crime, and Sandra Bullock is an FBI agent who has infiltrated the beauty pageant in order to try and figure out what's going on. And all of the beauty pageant contestants are being asked by Stan, the host, the regular question: what is the one most important thing our society needs? Stan asks each contestant, and Stan is played by William Shatner, also very funny. And so one after another, the beauty pageant contestants, in answer to that question, what's the one most important thing society needs, answer world peace. And so he asks Sandra Bullock, this undercover FBI agent, what's the one most important thing we need? And she says, that would be harsher punishment for parole violators, Stan. And the audience falls completely silent. And then she says, and world peace. And they give her a big round of applause. Okay, so here are the most important things that society needs. California's water society, if you will. We need a strong economy that equitably and efficiently allocates and uses water. We need healthy agricultural communities and healthy agricultural production with, I would argue, less uncertainty over water for them. We need the successful restoration and protection of California's unique environments that are such an important part of what makes up California. We need collaboration and public participation in decision-making over water. And we need world peace. So if dams and new infrastructure and new supply infrastructure aren't the answer anymore, or if they're not the only answer anymore, then how do we get to these things that we want? And let me offer 6 pieces of that. First, we need to rethink the concept of water supply. Rather than thinking about water supply as another dam and reservoir, another groundwater well, another aqueduct moving water from farther and farther away, which we have a lot of, let's look to smart conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater. Let's manage surface water and groundwater in an interconnected fashion. Hydrologically, they're interconnected, but we've sort of treated them separately, and it's time to treat them together. It turns out the smartest new reservoir in California may be the groundwater reservoir that we've overtapped, that can be recharged during wet years and used during dry years in a more conjunctive fashion. Let's relearn traditional methods, perhaps, of rainwater harvesting. Let's think that treated wastewater is a source of supply. It's not a liability, it's an asset. And we've treated it as a liability and we've thrown it away, but let's treat it as an asset, as a new source of water supply. Let's look to new and advanced technologies like desalination where appropriate, or advanced treatment where appropriate. There are different ways of thinking about water supply without taking more water from the overtapped system that we're already using. Second, we have to properly apply economic tools. Water should be properly priced. The failure to price water properly leads to overuse, it leads to underinvestment, it leads to poor economic decisions. Now, most of us don't pay enough for water. Even those of us who pay a regular water bill don't pay enough for water. But the proper use of economics also means that water has to be fairly priced to reflect costs, to reflect efficient use and encourage efficient use, and to protect the poor. It also means the proper thinking about subsidies and perhaps the elimination of certain kinds of subsidies in California. Third, we have to protect water quality, and we have to do a better job of matching water needs with the quality of the water that we have. We have to develop real-time, accurate water monitoring systems and more serious and comprehensive efforts to protect water from contamination. And that may mean that the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act need a bit of a slap in the head for the 21st century. I love the Clean Water Act. I love the Safe Drinking Water Act. I think they're incredibly important tools, but they need to be brought into the 21st century. Different water uses require different water qualities. We water our lawns and we flush our toilets with potable drinking water. We spent a lot of money collecting water, moving it to where we need it, treating it to an incredibly high standard, and then we use it for things that don't require potable drinking water. Let's rethink that. Often, the best way to deal with wastewater is to figure out how not to produce it in the first place, or to produce less of it. This is actually one of the big successes of the Clean Water Act in the 70s that put in place standards for wastewater. Turned out one of the best ways to meet the standards of the Clean Water Act was not to figure out how to treat our wastewater, but to figure out how to produce less of it in the first place. That was a huge change in philosophy at the time. So let's deal with water quality differently than we've dealt it in the past. Fourth, we have to expand our concepts of water management and regulation and develop some new institutions, or use our existing institutions better. We have a lot of different water institutions. Some of them are very good, but some of them aren't being used as effectively or as they ought to be. Let's address growth in a comprehensive manner. Why is land use policy and water policy treated differently, treated separately? They always have been, but we'd better treat growth and water issues together if we hope to address water problems and sprawl problems and land use problems. Let's move from local water management to regional water management in California and elsewhere. Let's complement the big centralized facilities that we have that have offered big advantages to us with small-scale decentralized facilities for water purification and wastewater treatment. It may turn out that the smartest thing we can do is build regional small-scale wastewater treatment systems that permit us to reuse that water locally where appropriate, rather than to capture our wastewater and move it many, many miles to some centralized water treatment system and then treat it and throw it away. Let's bring local communities and voices into real decision-making roles. Maybe we ought to use the power of the State Water Resources Control Board to really address beneficial and reasonable use. We've got some great precedent in California. We have a constitution that says water should be used beneficially and reasonably. And we have a board that has the power to define some of those things in a very effective way. Maybe we should use that more often. Fifth, let's do more with less water. Let's grow more food. Let's flush more toilets. Let's wash more clothes. Let's produce more energy. Let's produce more goods and services. Let's do more of everything with less water. This is a key thing, and I'm going to spend a little more time on this. We have to stop taking the demand for water for granted, or as a fixed and immutable thing, something to be assumed rather than managed. Our goal is not to use water. Our goal is to do other things. It's to get rid of our wastes. It's to grow food. It's to produce semiconductors. almost all of the things that we do require some amount of water. But I'm arguing that almost all of the things we do, and we've argued this at the Institute, the Pacific Institute, for a long time, almost all of the things that we do that require water actually require less water than we spend to do them. We can improve the efficiency of our water use enormously, reduce the demand for water, and still have a healthy economy, a healthy agricultural sector, a healthier environment. That means rethinking water use and efficiency and reducing waste and reducing loss. I think improving efficiency is the most important tool in our arsenal in water management. Now, it's only one tool, but it's a really important one. And in what may be the best sign that we can do this, more and more individuals and water districts and agencies and corporations and countries are using less water, literally less water. The United States uses less water today for everything than we used 20 years ago, which is a remarkable, relatively unknown fact. We use less water today, absolute value of water, not just per capita, but we use less water today than we used 20 years ago. Our population's bigger, our economy's exponentially growing, something economists love to see, which I won't get into. But our water use is declining, has declined substantially. And I think we can do a lot more. The Pacific Institute did a study about a year ago called California Water 2030. It's on our website. It's a vision for an efficient water vision for California's water use. And it shows that we can have growing population and a healthy agricultural sector and a growing economy and use 20% less water than we're using today with existing technology, not new imaginary technologies, with existing technology. Sixth, the last one, let's integrate climate change into every aspect of water management and system design and use. Climate change is a real problem. You're going to hear a lot more about it. The Institute's done a lot of work on water and climate change. The state of California has done more work on climate change than almost any other political entity certainly in the country, maybe in the world. I think we've done a remarkable job. We have not yet figured out how to integrate the issue of climate change, however, into our decisions about resource management. We're trying. There's a lot of work going on in this, some very interesting work, some very innovative work. For water, the climate cycle is the hydrologic cycle. Evaporation, formation of clouds, condensation, precipitation, runoff. That is the climate cycle. And as the climate changes, we're going to have very significant impacts on water resources. So we need to do two things. We need to figure out the mitigation side. We need to figure out how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there are actually some very interesting links with water there. It turns out the best way to save energy in California may be to save water. Some of the cheapest ways of saving energy may be water efficiency projects that save hot water, or prevent another acre-foot of water from being pumped over the Tehachapi's into Los Angeles. And so there are all sorts of opportunities there. But on the other side, there are going to be unavoidable impacts of climate change. It doesn't matter to some degree. I'm not saying don't reduce greenhouse gases, I am. But no matter what we do in that area, we're committed to irreversible climate change in the short run, and I would argue in the long run. And that means we have to deal with adaptation. And that means water managers had better be thinking about how to deal with sea level rise and impacts on coastal ecosystems and impacts on outfall structures for wastewater plants and so on. We're going to have to deal with a loss of snowpack in the Sierra and a change in the timing of runoff. We're going to have to deal with an increase in the demand for water because of higher temperatures. All of those things have to be integrated into our water management system, and we haven't. So I think we face serious risks and unresolved water challenges, things left over from the 20th century, and I think we face some new ones in the 21st century. But I also believe that there are real, affordable, attractive, effective ways forward to a positive vision for California water. And I think we can see to some degree how to make the transition from where we are to where we want to be. I think we're going to hear about many of those in this symposium over the next 2 days. I think that transition is inevitable. I think we're going to move to that positive vision inevitably. And the real question is, can we do it fast enough in a way to avoid some of the most painful things that are going to happen if we don't speed up that transition? And I look forward to the discussion about how to accelerate the transition over the next few days. Thank you very much.
I believe we have a few minutes for questions, and Dr. Gleick has graciously agreed to take them on. So if you do have questions, please come to the mic. And I don't know if people are just reticent or haven't gotten your coffee infusion yet, but let me pose one. Peter, you mentioned that as one of your recommendations, better and more conjunctive use and planning for groundwater and surface water resources. You mentioned that in California, at least traditionally, that has not been done. Indeed, and California is perhaps the only state, depending on how you count Texas, that doesn't, on a comprehensive basis, regulate groundwater at all as part of its water rights system. Later in your presentation, you talked about moving from local water management to regional water management. What is the role of the state, or is there one, with respect to conjunctive use and particularly groundwater management?
Well, a couple of thoughts about that. There are still areas in which local management is appropriate, but if we move more toward regional management, then the idea that surface water and groundwater are different or unconnected gets harder to believe in. It's wrong, of course. They are very closely connected. And so I think regional management will help that. Like many people, I've been dismayed for a long time about our ridiculous groundwater management approaches. And we're not alone. I mean, there are other states that have this problem too. But interestingly, despite how bad we are about managing groundwater, we're sort of working around the fact that we don't have smart groundwater law or conjunctive use. And in places where groundwater withdrawals are real problems, we've moved toward adjudicating basins, and we've actually moved toward legal solutions. And I guess when problems get bad enough, we work around them. I think the first step, I would love to see a state groundwater law, acknowledging that groundwater is a state resource, acknowledging that there has to be comprehensive monitoring first of every groundwater withdrawal. The fact that we don't monitor groundwater withdrawal is archaic. Barbaric comes to mind too. It's just ridiculous. So every groundwater use ought to be monitored. Now, like handgun regulation, there's a fear that the more we know, the more likely there is to be somebody's going to want to take away my groundwater. And I think farmers are worried about groundwater regulation because they worry about then losing their right to use groundwater or as much as they want. Well, yeah, that's a problem. And I think we have to get around that. I don't know if we can, but I would love to see that as a first step. Comprehensive monitoring and then comprehensive regulation and allocation.
Any other questions?
Sure, I'll follow up on that, since I'd characterize Rick's question as kind of what do you see needing to be changed from a legal perspective. Do you think California, though, has the governance structure in place to deal with some of these water issues? The fact that supply planning is divorced from water quality planning, divorced from the water rights aspect of it, and do we have the tools in place to actually move forward to address the issues as you've laid them out?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a scientist by training. I do think we have a lot of the tools. And they're not just legal tools, of course, and they're not just institutional tools. Sometimes they're technological tools. I do believe we have a lot of them. And you and I talked a little bit about the board, and I mentioned the State Water Resources Control Board, which is a potentially very effective tool. Part of it is using the tools we have better, more broadly. And part of it is where we don't have the tools, developing new ones, either New institutions are figuring out how to have existing institutions work together more effectively. And I think, I don't think we necessarily need to assume new institutions if we can make existing ones work more effectively. So that's a short answer to a good question and a hard one. But I think we're moving in the right direction. I just want to move there faster.
Let's take two more brief questions. I think that's about all we can manage before we need to take a break.
This ties in with the answer you just gave, which is you mentioned that the California State Water Resources Control Board should make better use of the California constitutional requirement for reasonable and beneficial use. And I'm wondering if you have specific recommendations about how the board should approach that issue and what they should do with the reasonable and beneficial use requirement.
Well, I think there are a lot of opportunities there, and there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. I tend to think about it because we've done a lot of work at the Institute on this issue of efficiency, water conservation and efficiency. I would love to see some case, if you will, that questions whether or not certain kinds of traditional water uses are as efficient as they could be given existing economics and technology, and whether the increment of water that is being used inefficiently to produce the good and service that we want is beneficial or reasonable. Is it reasonable to use flood irrigation on crops that could be grown with precision sprinklers and still produce a cost-effective return to the grower and so on? Is that increment a reasonable use? I don't know, but that's one example.
Last question.
Hi, Mike Wilson at the School of Public Health. Working with Cal EPA, learned that they were looking at the largest hazardous waste sites in the state, about 51 of them, and they found that 48 of the 51 had breached their containment and were leaking directly into the groundwater, about 94% of them. I'm curious if the problem of groundwater contamination by industrial pollutants, by pesticides, and now by pharmaceuticals, I think you mentioned, if that is an emerging issue in the question of water quality in California or not.
In the interest of a green conference.
Well done.
Oops, I know what's coming.
Okay. One of the reasons why people buy bottled water is they don't trust their tap water. Right or wrong, they don't trust their tap water. They hear about pharmaceuticals, they hear about perchlorate or MTBE, they hear about the contamination of groundwater, and they worry. They ought to worry. This is one of the areas in which Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act ought to get together and enter the 21st century. We know how to keep groundwater clean. We know how to clean dirty water. But we haven't done a great job of both. I think we need to monitor groundwater contamination much better. I think we need some new technologies for ensuring that water contaminants don't get into our drinking water. I think we've done a pretty good job at that. I don't drink bottled water in the United States because there's no need for it. It's a very expensive, inappropriate thing given our water systems. But I do worry about our falling behind our ability to contaminate water. We seem to be very good at that and less good at our ability to monitor and protect it. So I think we need to do two things. We need to do more monitoring, and then we need to make sure that groundwater contaminants aren't put in or are adequately contained when they're there, and that we treat the water that comes out to the appropriate level for the appropriate use. We can take a lot of things out of water. It's a question of money. We could spend a lot more money on water treatment and come nowhere near the cost of what this stuff costs.
All right, a terrific launch to a provocative 2 days. Please join me in thanking our keynote speaker, Peter Gleick.